Hi, and welcome to Communicating in a Crisis from the Communication Club. This is the presentation from our February 5th meeting. We had to cancel that meeting, but wanted to make sure you got the presentation and the information so that you can get these great tips on how to communicate in a crisis. So let's begin. I'm Michelle Antros, Club President, and wanted to make sure that you had some guiding principles when talking about a crisis, because crises affect us all. As communicators, we need to identify potential crises and deal with them as best as we can. We certainly can't prevent all crises, but we can avoid some and prepare for others. So you'll find in this presentation some practical, hands-on method for looking at crises, from developing your own communications plan and learning from the crises that have happened within your organization. So some guiding principles first. Family comes first. So when communicating about crises to your internal and external audiences, it's important for you to remember that family should come first. That means that your internal stakeholders, for example, your employees, your students, or shareholders, board members, they should hear about a crisis first. And if you have the luxury of having time before a crisis becomes public, make sure to take care of family first. So all your internal stakeholders should know before they hear about it on the news, in the media. Unfortunately, these days, sometimes things come out first, so you need to be ready with your communications plan ahead of time. And second would be to tell your own story. Don't hesitate to disclose information about the crisis. Disclosing it yourself allows you to better control the crisis and the messaging. And next is be ready for anything. Prepare for anything, no matter how big or small the situation is. Being blindsided, it worsens a crisis. So be ready and stay ready. Know that nothing is secret. Confidentiality and discretion are not as valued today as they once were. Remember that nothing is a secret, and information may be leaked, even by people you think you can trust. So therefore, be savvy, be smart, and even a little cautious when communicating intimate details about a crisis. And last, be available 24/7. Crises aren't planned, and they have lives of their own. When they occur, organizations need to adopt an all hands on deck philosophy and mentality. And all members of the crisis management team, all members of your leadership team need to be available every day, all day, for as long as necessary to endure the crisis and communicate effectively. So to communicate effectively during a crisis, you have to know your stakeholders really well. You have to empathize with them, and you have to communicate openly with them, listen to them, and use some common sense. Now, what is a crisis? Well, it could be a change in the market. It could be an internal crisis. It could be an external crisis. And it's impossible to list every potential crisis, but understanding some major categories can help you identify the kinds of crises that you and your organization need to avoid if possible. So simply put, a crisis is a change, a sudden or even slowly evolving, that results in urgent problems that must be addressed immediately. And it can occur in many forms. Life-threatening product defects can be discovered, or computer hackers shut down a company's entire system or deny access to customers. A hard freeze destroys a region's citrus crops, or a terrorist attack destroys lives and property, or even a key manager dies with no immediate replacement. Crises are not the normal ups and downs of a business cycle. Those recurring problems that you face, those aren't crises. Their crises are wrenching, they're very painful, yet some good can come out of them, because the learning that comes from dealing with a crisis, it contains the seeds for future growth, future success in crisis prevention, crisis management, and in some cases even new opportunities. So there's also uncontrollable natural events, there's also health and environmental disasters. There's some things that may or may not be caused by the company, but are directly related to the company. the company might be responsible or perceived to be responsible for dealing with them. So during a crisis, you want to make sure that you and your leadership team, your colleagues, are doing situational analysis. You want to make sure that you have all of the facts. Anytime you get a piece of information, is this something that you know, or is this something that you think? What time did it happen? What was the key event? And then what are your assumptions in dealing with this? What are your deductions from the situations that are happening around you as they unfold? So you want to be sure to characterize the event. Is it an injury to a person? Is it a serious financial loss? Is there potential damage to your company's reputation? Is it legal action? You also want to evaluate the size of the crisis. You want to determine its scope and magnitude. You have to quickly gather as much information as possible and ask yourself, how many people are involved? Who are they? Have any laws been broken? If yes, which ones? Who already knows about this? What do they know? Who needs to know? Get the information you need. You'll need key information, what's happening as it happens. You'll need to ask the right people the right questions and work with teams to make sure that information is flowing. And then you want to develop your action plan. What's going to happen when? By whom? What's the expected time? Who are the stakeholders that need to be contacted? Who are the stakeholders, internal and internal, that you need to provide messaging to? So you want to expect rumors, you want to expect false information, and you also want to make sure that you're notifying key people. So here are 3 steps that you've got to take during any crisis. The first is creating a resource plan. And depending on the type of crisis, you have to consider what you might need to resolve it. And then you plan for those resources to be on hand when needed. So if you need to have employees traveling to certain areas of the world, they might need quick access to cash. They might need things on the ground. You have to determine what resources they'll need and how you'll get it to them and who's going to be in charge. So that's your resource plan. That's step 1. And next is to create a communication plan. Decide who will need to know about the crisis, including both internal and external people, and then develop a communication plan so that each key person will be informed as needed. The communication plan could be as simple as an emergency contact list or a more complex communication tree designating the flow of messages. And then step 3 is to distribute the resource and communication plans and make sure all key people have and understand each plan. Call a meeting to review the plans and go over each person's role during an emergency, and do a mock crisis drill to test whether the plan will actually work. And here's some tips for creating crisis messaging. So you've got to send those messages quickly. In the age of social media, minutes can seem like a lifetime. It takes very, very small amounts of time for crises to blow up. So you want to give as much detail as possible. Your messaging should be clear and firm. It should not be offensive or defensive. You can use humor when appropriate, but if there's any type of loss of life or injury to different people, you don't want to use humor at all. Use empathy when needed and explain how the crisis is going to be resolved. And here are some don'ts. Do not speculate. Don't guess. Don't cover up, lie, or hedge. Don't qualify sympathy. Don't assign blame. Don't promise anything that you can't deliver. And absolutely do not walk into a press conference or any kind of presentation unprepared. So you don't want to be like PP. They had an explosion at an oil derrick. 11 people lost their lives, and millions upon millions of gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. And the CEO and leadership team, but especially the CEO, the chairman, gave several statements that were, how do you describe it? They made it about themselves. They gave flat-footed, insensitive, and downright deceptive statements since the explosion of that Deepwater Horizon oil platform, which killed 11 workers and was the largest oil spill in U.S. history. So the CEO said things like, "There's no one who wants this over more than I do. I'd like my life back." Certainly something very insensitive, especially since people actually lost their lives. And the Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean. Well, first, it's not an ocean. And secondly, he was trying to minimize what happened. It was a bit bumpy to get it going. We made a few mistakes early on. And he was referring to, at that time, there were fishermen and people, civilians who were trying to help, and BP required them to sign waivers to say that they wouldn't sue BP if something happened or they got sick later. And then when there's some people who were complaining about their illnesses, he responded, "I'm sure they were generally ill, but whether it was something to do with dispersants in oil, whether it was food poisoning or some other reason for them being ill." So here he's trying to distance what happened with some potential blowback from the locals. What the hell did we do to deserve this? And then the chairman said, "I hear comments sometimes that large oil companies are greedy companies or don't care, but that is not the case with BP. We care about the small people." So yeah, those are things that you don't want to say. You don't want to come off being insensitive. You don't want to come off being tone deaf. Uh, you don't want to come off being ridiculous. You need people's trust in a crisis. So here's what you must do. You must get the facts. You must show up in person. You must give the facts. You must be honest about what you know and what you don't know. Acknowledge and show sympathy for human suffering. Accept responsibility for handling the crisis, not causing it, but handling it. Give all the bad news at once. Don't give out piecemeal information. Give it all at once. Rip off the Band-Aid quickly. You want to communicate your brand or company's values along with that. You want to remind people that this is what we stand for. You do want to make a list of the 5 questions you would least like to be asked, and then get the answers to those questions, because you will be asked those questions. Set up a rumor control hotline if rampant speculation could fuel the crisis. This way you can handle rumors as they come up, as you're hearing things in the media, as you're hearing things from your colleagues and employees. Set up a hotline that addresses them straight on and get that word out there. Record a voice message on a phone line at the end of each day to give an update. This way people feel as if you're being transparent, you're giving them information in a timely manner, and you can be trusted. So use a website to gather and post important information, whether it's a microsite or your main company website. That's a very useful way to get information out there. And of course, hopefully the crisis isn't that your website is down. And at the end, you do want to do an autopsy. You want to start by analyzing the crisis from beginning to end. Pinpoint actions, assumptions, and outside factors that precipitated the crisis. And ask yourself some questions. Knowing what we knew then, could this have been prevented, and how? At what point did we realize we were in a crisis? Could we have recognized the signs earlier? What warning signals went off that we may have ignored? What warning signals did we pay attention to? What were the early signs? Were they turning points? What did we do right? What could we have done better? What were the stress points in the system that failed? So you want to look and plan ahead, and knowing what you know now, how can you prevent the same type of crisis from occurring again? And create a plan so that you learn from what you know. But you want to make sure you get input from everyone. You need to get everyone's story, but pay attention in particular to those with expertise in the areas of importance. Now for some questions that people generally ask. So if I'm required to speak to the media, should I talk off the record? I would say no. In general, it's a poor practice to speak off the record. If you don't want to see statements that you make in print or online, you probably shouldn't be making them in the first place. In rare occasions, it might be helpful to provide background information, but this should be done only in extraordinary circumstances. Another question is, if I have important information to reveal relating to a crisis, whom should I tell first? The media, the employees, the shareholders, or the public? Well, if you've got time, and typically you don't, if you've got time, as I said earlier, you start with family first. However, in this modern age of information that travels very quickly, tell everyone at the same time. Everyone has a right to know, but the only practical solution in order to have people not be shocked by something they see in the media is to inform everyone at about the same time. And if you want, you can start with a cascade, start internal and immediately go external. Should I go to the location of the crisis? Well, the answer to this is obviously depends on the circumstances, but it's generally best to be at the location of the crisis. You can bring along key members of staff, and communications can be established rather quickly anywhere. Should I say publicly how bad the outcome of a given situation might turn out to be? I don't think any effective leader can be a pessimist, but by the same token, a good leader has to be a realist. Most people would rather know the full range of reasonable possibilities than to be surprised by a very negative outcome. So adopting this strategy of total candor, the possibility always exists for positive news, something that is welcome in a time of crisis. If a key person's not performing well in the midst of a crisis, should that person be replaced? It depends. Changing leadership in the middle of a crisis is not really desirable and should be avoided if possible. Um, but if you're like BP, yanking that CEO out was the best thing they could have done because he completely had the company showing themselves as uncaring, only caring about money, not caring about the lives that were lost. So changes in personnel are best handled in more normal times, but if someone is simply not performing the job or making things worse, then there's no alternative than to make a change. Should I publicly admit an error or a mistake? Generally, it would be yes. There are, of course, legal implications for doing that that must be weighed. In the long term, however, if errors have been made, it's best to recognize them. If for no reason, then they will almost inevitably come out in any event. So, who should the public spokesperson be in times of crisis? Should it be the head of PR? Should it be the head of a site, a location? Well, if it's a true crisis affecting the corporation as a whole, the spokesperson should be the CEO. Um, if it's something affecting one location, certainly the most senior individual on site can be recognized as having authority to speak on behalf of that site. So it may well be that the head of a site or head of public relations should be the spokesperson, but if it's truly a crisis affecting the organization, it should be the CEO. So that's the end of the prepared presentation, and I hope that you found some tips that you can use the next time your organization, are caught in a crisis. So just remember to send messages quickly, give as much detail as possible, and use empathy, showing the brand or the corporation's feeling. And just remember that everyone wants to know what is going on and what is going to be done to fix the problem.